Okay, the participant number seems to have leveled off, so we will go ahead and begin. First and foremost, I would like to introduce Wendy Sullivan. Wendy has more than 45 years of experience advocating for the inclusion of people with developmental disabilities. As a special education teacher, she came to Easter Seals Midwest to work directly with people, helping them to live in their own homes, find jobs, and make friends. She was promoted to positions of increasing responsibility and became the CEO of this organization in 1997. Under Wendy's leadership, the expansion of programs, mergers, and acquisitions has made Easter Seals the largest organization to serve people with disabilities in the state of Missouri. The organization continues to expand to meet the needs of individuals and families throughout the state, as well as in Kansas and Illinois. Wendy furthers the mission of Easter Seals Midwest by advocating for and with people we serve. Wendy has led initiatives to deinstitutionalize people who need support to live in the community and to increase funding for those services. She also serves on the Affiliate Leader Council and Public Policy Committee at the Easter Seals National Organization. I'll turn it over to Wendy Sullivan.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. At Easter Seals, advocacy isn't just something we do. It's one of our core values. It's part of who we are. Over the years, I've had the privilege of seeing what happens when people speak up for themselves and for their communities. Policies shift, doors open, and systems start to work better for the people they were meant to serve. I've seen families become empowered, staff discover their voices, and entire communities push for change that once felt out of reach. That's why I'm so excited we're launching this Advocacy Toolbox series. It's a chance for all of us, no matter our role, to strengthen our skills, build confidence, and continue driving the kind of change we know is possible. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring deeply and stepping into this work together. Let's get started. I will hand you over to Kathy Brown.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Brown. I will be your moderator this afternoon and for the duration of this series. I'm so glad you're here with us today. We are thrilled to have you joining us. Whether you're a seasoned advocate or brand new to this work, you belong here and you belong as part of this conversation. Before we review the overview of the Advocacy Toolbox series and then hand it over to Chris Worth for the first in our 5-part series, let's see who all is here. I would love if you would respond to the polls that are going to pop up on your screen and drop your name and your favorite ice cream flavor in the chat, just so we can get a sense of who all is here and get a little interaction in our webinar today. You should see a poll now that asks that you most identify as a person with a disability, a family member, a professional who provides services, or none of the above. That poll will stay up for just about 20 seconds. It'll go away. And then you'll have a second question to respond to, if you would be so kind. It looks like most of us here are professionals who provide services. Thank you to the self-advocates and family members who are joining us today. We're so glad you're here. The second question is, I have contacted my legislator before, yes or no? Oh, I see a lot of those numbers moving. It looks like a lot of people have made contact with an elected official in the past. That is awesome. For those of you who have not, we hope that by the end of this series, you're able to answer yes on some of those questions. Thank you so much for your responses. Go ahead and keep dropping your name and favorite ice cream flavor in the chat. We would love to see who's here and get to know you, and that allows other participants as well to see if they see any friends on the webinar today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be provided to registered participants. You are muted, so you will not be able to ask a question using your voice. You'll have to use other methods. There is a Q&A feature in this Zoom. There's a Q&A feature here in this Zoom event, and that's where you will drop questions for the presenter. For presenters, it can sometimes be awkward not to have the reaction of an audience, so I really encourage you to use those reaction buttons. I saw a little hearts floating up on my screen when Wendy was talking, so as the kids say, smash those like buttons if you hear something that excites you. Like I said, if you have questions for Chris, the presenter, please use that Q&A box. I'll be watching that for him. If you like closed captions, you can turn those on yourself. I believe at the bottom of your screen, depending on how you're joining. And first, I'm going to give you a little bit more of an overview about the Advocacy Toolbox series. The intention of this series is to equip all of us, people who support individuals with disabilities, people with disabilities, their families, those we serve, and community members who just have an interest in the well-being of others with the tools to make change. Across these 5 sessions, we're going to connect with each other, build knowledge, learn new advocacy strategies, and we're going to strengthen our collective power. Some of the folks on the call who work with Easter Seals will recognize some of these bolded words in blue. The series designed to connect advocates, empower us with information, deploy innovative strategies, and build our power and influence so that we can impact issues that are most important to us. Here's how we're going to do it. The first thing we'll do is to find our way. This installment of the series is called The Compass. This session is about grounding ourselves, where we've come as a disability rights movement, how government and policy connect to our everyday lives, and why our stories really matter. Effective advocacy isn't just about having the right tools. It's really about your purpose. And like anything else we do, the most important thing is why we do it. So I'm really excited to spend some time with Chris Worth today, discovering some of those things. Next in our series will be Hammers and Nails, Building a Strong Foundation in State Advocacy. We're going to have some absolutely phenomenal guests to talk about what the hot issues, particularly at the Missouri State Legislative level, are likely going to be discussed when they go back into session in January. We have experts on kids issues, we have experts on the budget, and we have experts on a variety of disability issues who are going to be with us to talk about that. So if you haven't yet registered, that session is December 2nd from 12 to 1. We'll find out what's really happening at the state level and why it matters to you. The next in this series, The Lock and Key, Unlocking Real Relationships in Advocacy. Influence and advocacy is all about relationship building. And we are going to hear from a former legislator, an executive coach, former state senator Scott Roop about making authentic connections with policymakers and allies. Next, we're going to get together and we are going to talk about our blueprint. What is our strategy? What are the tactics that we will employ in order to create influence with legislators and make sure that we are advocating together? This session will bring everything together, priorities, shared strategies, and we'll talk about how we move forward as one community with one voice. Our final session focuses on storytelling, how to tell your story in a way that moves people and drives change. We will be welcoming back Chris Worth for the end of this series, and that will occur January 6th from 12 to 1. If you haven't already, please go to eastersealsmidwest.org or midwest.easterseals.org and you'll find a block that looks like this that you can click on and register for the remaining sessions in this series. And that brings us to today's speaker. We are incredibly fortunate to begin this series with someone who lives and breathes grassroots advocacy and who understands how everyday people create extraordinary change. It's my honor to introduce you to someone I think everybody should know, Christopher Worth. Chris is a PhD candidate and an instructor at the University of Missouri St. Louis, where his research focuses on creativity, self-determination, and the dignity of risk, core ideas at the heart of the disability rights movement and self-advocacy. He teaches the fundamentals of grassroots community organizing and brings more than 20 years of community organizing and advocacy experience. Chris understands the history of this movement and the power of people, relationships, and community. I will note that on the screen, he is named Chris Jones. This is a technical error and mistake, but be rest assured, we have the real Chris Worth with us live and in person. So please click the clap emoji button and welcome Chris Worth. And Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kathy. So, this afternoon, I'm gonna kind of give us that why. Many of you might even think, well, I already have it, but it's good to be reminded, um, why we are in the space that we are in. And even for folks with lived experience, disability in the room, who may or may not work for Easter Seals, it's good to also know that you are not alone, right? We are a community. Part of what you're going to hear throughout the series, so not just from my floating head on the screen here, but throughout, is about collective power. Kathy Brown offered that for us, just those two words. Collective power um, is um, is really about community, right? So can we move forward? Um, and collective power is about people, right? And it's about um, um, organized resources. Now, you're going to hear more about this later in the series. But I do want to touch on it because really, uh, this um, this slide is about our history. It's about why we're here. And many people, I teach mostly 19-year-olds, so but many of them and many other people that I know say to me, well, I need money to to do the advocacy thing well. And money is important, right? But really, the whole thing is about what gifts and talents do you bring to the table, right? How can you push yourself to share those? And um, those gifts and talents are worth $1,000,000 when you're really engaging your story. Now, you're not going to hear about that story from me so much, but that is a part of your history, right? And so, real power exists in the relationship between people. I would even say that a place, and I think I've actually said this to audiences, including my students, a place like Easter Seals Midwest huge place, right? Lots of power. I would even call it a community organization, right? When most people think of community organization, they might think small, right? But I always think about an organization being made up of people in relationship to each other. And that relationship is about a shared story. Can we move forward? That shared story is actually pulling from a lot of history, right? Um, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So we might be in interesting times politically, right, and socially, um, especially within the legislature, right? But that's not. This is not the first difficult time that people with disabilities and our allies, you'll hear me use the term ally a lot in this presentation and in the future presentation, because if you don't have a disability, you're still a part of, but you interact with our community regularly, you're still a part of that community. What your allyship is important, right? So your story is important. I'm sure um, Greg Kramer goes up to the Capitol and he shares his historical story with the legislature about being a part of uh, uh, Easter Seals Midwest, right? That's what community organizers call um, institutional knowledge, right? That stuff is important, right? Um, and has been important to our movement from time immemorial. Now, of course, I was sitting, we're going to talk today about three specific historical stories. But I was um, sitting, and as I was listening to Wendy and Kathy, I thought of this phrase, um, um, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. If you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. Um, that phrase um, is true, right? So we have to know both in good and bad ways, right? Because what I mean by the good is sometimes people don't know. Like when I was a teenager, I barely knew about disability history, right? I often thought of myself as the only as a um, as self-centered as a teenager can get. I thought of myself as the only person in the universe, right? I should see some laughing emojis, right? But as I got to know a little bit of history, right? As I got to know a little bit of history, I realized that my life is actually on the shoulders of others, on the shoulders of others. So, one thing as that phrase came to me, right? One thing is I thought of Easter Seals, Easter Seal Midwest's, um, collective power in their story, right? So that history is important, right? The sometimes, like me as a teenager, sometimes you get to a point where You can think of that yourself as going through the toughest time and not really remembering that there have been tough times before you, right? And that it took knowing your history to reflect on that. When you're young, you might not even be able to do that. So I think that sometimes, um, that might be a place where young people with disabilities need extra support to know that they, this has happened before. This has happened before. What's happening in our community, what's happening in the legislature, what's happening in our daily life, right? Someone has experienced that, right? It may not be the exact um, twin of the situation, right? All situations have difference, but um, it it can feel or has felt um, just as urgent in times past, right? So a key, what organizers say, and we can move forward. Oh, I should have. Sorry. Um, you can dock my pay, Kathy. I forgot that I wrote this slide. So, um, one thing that we need to understand is that what organizers say is that um, knowing knowing our history, um, understanding that we are um, part of that history, that it's not um, history is not um, something that starts and stops, right? That like there have been people with disabilities um, up as part of community since the High Paleolithic period, right? Right? We have been working to uh, have a place in the community at large for a long time, right? A long time. When we think about um, um, when we think about that, um, 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 when we think about um, how um, institutions came about, right? Um, oh, and I should say that a lot of my thinking this afternoon comes, here we go, Kathy, comes from the book um, A Disability History of the United States. And um, um, and you all, if you get a chance to read that, or I also you can find it on Audible too. So if you're a slow reader like I am, you can um, listen to it. It's a really good book. Um, it made it into my dissertation. So, you know, there have been points throughout history where we've felt like things could not get better, right? We've had people with intellectual and developmental disabilities put in full on Gotham City style, like thinking about Batman, um, institutions, right? Those places, um, you know, in some places in the world, some places in the United States, they still exist, right? They may look different, but we are constantly working. History is constantly moving, right? So when we feel the dread of the common problems that are happening right now, we have to remember that we can still have an impact. We can still have an impact. So, um, those key milestones um, that we um, that we reference. I'm thinking the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm thinking the 504 sit-in and the rehabilitation. Oh, don't go forward yet. Not yet. Those are those are all um, um, milestones, and now you can go forward. We have always had collective relationships as people with disabilities. This person, now, her title is a little off-putting to us these days. Um, that whole cripple suffragette. This is from the turn of the last century, or the turn of the last century, actually. I'm old. Um, and Rosa May Billinghurst was a major women's activist. She was she fought for the right for women to vote, right, alongside able-bodied neurotypical. I've never been able to find her disability, but she, a story that I tell my students is that she used to try to go and vote, right? And men would line up to block the uh, voting, uh, the polling area. Remember, polling is an issue or the right to vote is an issue that we're facing still today, right? Maybe not for most women, but for people with disabilities, the right to vote can still be hampered by decisions made at our capitals. I pluralize the word capitals, right? So, um, uh, you know, so she, um, so these men would line up, and they would, and I only giggle because it's kind of shocking. They would take their cigars and they would burn the um, arms of the women who were trying to break the line. It was called break the because remember the men were blocking the way, right? So Rosa May had a situation where they some folks got mad at her because she was militant kind of in her approach, and they pushed her out of her wheelchair, right? They pushed her out of her wheelchair, and she had to be in the hospital for several weeks, right? And in, but she recovered, and so she had some trade unionists, some trade union folks build her a new wheelchair, and she made sure that this wheelchair would give her the ability to push through that uh, through that line. She was tough, right? Now, I don't know a lot about her community, right? The people she surrounded herself with, but I can see just by the picture, right? So for those who can't see the picture, if you're blind and you're joining us or visually impaired, it's a sort of semicircle of women and some men, a police officer, and a young boy is looking at um, the camera almost directly, and another woman behind Rosa May, right? And Rosa May's in the middle of this sort of semicircle in a very, what looks like to me, a very modern wheelchair for the time. Now, I could see her getting support from her fellow um, suffragettes, right? Right? I could see her getting support. Now, when we think about terms like natural supports, I always giggle because we think of that as a rather, at least I do, a rather new term. uh, but uh, Kim Nielsen would point out that throughout history, people have had, cultures have had moments where they've known that all they have to do is carve out opportunities for people, and all people can raise their voice if they do it in the right, if they carve it out in such a way that it supports folks. This is something that Kim Nielsen, who wrote A Disability History of the United States, has found as far, within Native American tribes and even within rural America when, um, you know, we often um, get this idea that, um, situations are black and white. Like all people with uh, with intellectual and developmental disabilities were just put in sheltered um, or put in institutions, and that was largely true, right? But there were examples of folks being integrated into the community. Right now, what does that have to do with advocacy? Well, it has a lot to do with it. Rosa May wouldn't be the hero, I think, or heroine that she is, had she not had the support of others. Right now, that's not just a disability thing. Kathy Brown would not be as good at her job if she didn't know me, and vice versa. We have a relationship. So, those kind of relationships have existed throughout history, even in tough times. Even in tough times, right? We can come together as a community. Um, like Rosa May completely had her wheelchair dismantled. They thought they had taken her out, right? Um, to tie in, to tie in, um, legislative action during this period. Um, so when we think about Helen Keller, Helen Keller was um, alive during Rosa May's lifetime. Rosa May was in England. Helen was here in the United States. And she started advocating for folks um, by the time she was in her late 20s. She was still meeting with presidents, meeting with presidents by the time, by, no, no, she was still meeting with presidents in 1960, right? In 1960. So her advocacy spanned years. Um, also, I didn't include Helen because we always hear, or at least in my world, people reference her a lot. And the thing is, Rosa May is just as powerful. Helen had an impact that Helen Keller had an impact. I hope I didn't say Helen the whole time. I've been referring to Helen Keller. Helen Keller had an impact that um, still affects us today. She was one of the founding members of um, um, the American Civil Liberties Union, right? She she really fought for women's rights. So she and Rosa May were on the cutting edge, getting support, right? Creating organizations that would support future work. Can we go forward? And if future work that has helped us, um, 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 and we're still feeling today. Like, I never thought I'm 47. I'm being brave in saying that. And I never thought I would see, um, you know, little pushing against the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, in my lifetime again. In fact, I want to push it to improve it. But there are people who still want to get rid of it. It's a little bit more conservative than I would like. Um, um, but we have a history of having to um, what I call create, and I'm treating you like my students here, but I like to talk about it, advocacy, the type of advocacy that I like as a delicious sandwich, right? And that one piece of the bread is the grassroots. The other piece of the bread, and that's that piece of bread is where like you stack all the things you want to make the sandwich, right? So it has to be strong. Like we have to have a presence, right? We have to um, we have to have a base to um, to put all that delicious stuff in there, and then that grass tops stuff. Grass tops is when you do the advocacy work that Kathy does at the Capitol, or that Greg and his team does at the Capitol, right? And both of those things make a delicious sandwich and make change happen, right? You have to have um, uh, some of this, some of the stuff that sort of interrupts the system, right? To bring awareness to um, to bring awareness to the situation, right? So, as I tell my students, it doesn't always have to be um, the direct action that we think of, like protest. I am not against protest. I think it's very important. It can also be too symbolic, right? Right? But people have been, people need that. People need that because in the symbolic, in the symbolic, you get community, right? Remember, um, um, even if things feel like they're not improving, right? Even if we feel like, um, uh, we're not doing enough to make the change that we want to see. You are adding to a history. When you write that letter or make that phone call, right? It's not just that you want to chat with the legislature, right? It's not just that you want to feel important, but you're adding to a history, and you're pushing what what uh, what what organizers call a phrase that we use is moving the dial. You're moving the dial. All right. And with the 504 situation, that was a time when we as a community, right? I wasn't there, but I feel very connected to it because it was a time when we stood up as a community and said that um, that we needed to change the world. We needed a fairer system. Um, Folks with disabilities, this always shocks my students. Up until 1972 and beyond, folks with disabilities didn't even have to go to school, right? Oh, I say and beyond because it takes a long time for legislation to come down. This is a process, right? So 504 was a huge fight, and it was um it ended up that we had the largest and longest sit-in. I don't know about largest, but longest sit-in. I know that's st historically accurate in U.S. history, where we took over. They took over buildings, not only um, in uh, California, but also in New York. Um, no, in Washington, D.C. I apologize. I don't know if it was a takeover of buildings in Washington, but they were present while people with disabilities were present coast to coast, fighting um, this legislation, right? And that included talking to legislatures, to legislators, right? That included real, um, honest to God conversations, like, uh, and it also included community power, right? Because without a lot of community supports, um, the 504 sit-in wouldn't have happened. Um, um, the Black Panthers have gotten a bad rap, but they helped um, support folks with food and with in-home care, and they made sure that everybody stayed as healthy as possible. Um, because there were people with all sorts of disabilities, not just spinal cord injury, but people with developmental and intellectual disabilities were in the space, right? So we need action. We need action, and we need to understand our collective history, right? In order to understand that action does create change. Does that make sense? Can I see some emojis? Not just from Kathy. So I think that one of the things that people often get afraid of is that they don't think they're powerful enough. And we're going to talk about power in this series beyond me, right? I hope you're talking about it in each piece of the series. But people often don't feel like they're powerful enough to take on systems, right? And if you are self-determined, right, we throw this concept of self-determination around like it's, you know, the 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 next great thing that's going to free us, which it it can be that. But self-determined also means being aware, being engaged, right, to the extent that you want to. And knowing that you're part of a larger system, right? If that makes sense. So, without the 504 sit-in, we wouldn't have a lot of what we have today. And a lot of time, I at least have felt recently that um, some of that is being, some of that history, folks are trying to chip away at that. Well, it's my responsibility to push it forward, to push it forward. Now, I have lots of privilege, right? I'm white, seemingly um, heterosexual and whatever. So I have tons of privilege. But what I found in my work is that everybody, absolutely everybody, has the ability to be as powerful as anybody else. And I don't mean that in a kumbaya sort of way. Can we move to the next one? I mean that in a way that is like, um, you know, we have, um, uh, I mean that in a way that, um, when we see a person who we think, um, well, I'm not sure they can do it, but I don't want them to be uncomfortable in taking on an advocacy role. Um, I would push yourself because, um, because when you have thoughts like that, what happens is you're applying your own compass to the situation. And um, I have been, um, I've been guilty of that. When I started working, I'd only done grassroots work, really. Um, when I started working here in St. Louis, I first worked for Colleen Starkloff at the Starkloff Disability Institute, and um, um, and I have when I went to work for a place called Paraquad, I found myself sometimes only because I was kind of overwhelmed in the situation. Um, I found myself really not listening to the folks that didn't have the loudest voice at first. And I really had to pull back and start thinking about my um, organizing training. And what I found was, this is a long story. We'll probably talk more about this in the next training. But what I found was the quietest people in the room. Sometimes they'd go to sleep even. They were so quiet because they felt run over by the louder voices, right? Um, we're the most powerful people. And the louder folks, they just, we, in this community, we have a situation where we don't often feel heard by able-bodied folks, right? So we spend a lot of time, and when I've done projects, grassroots kind of projects, I build in time for people to complain. I build in time because um, I, I want to get at their true voice. And the only way to do that is to let them know that they're being heard, right? So, in today's world, we still have, um, in a way that I didn't think possible before, we still have to be thinking about 504, right? We have to think about that sit-in. And we have to think about what kind of relationship do I have with an organization that supports me? Are they, can we, will, um, are they, um, uh, Kathy, am
I
I
just,
running?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to let you know that we have about 8 minutes left. We don't have any Q&As in the chat right now. So if anybody has a comment or question for Chris that they'd like to drop in the Q&A, then you have just a few minutes to do that. And so I just want to give you a sense of the time.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Can we move to the next one just real quick? Okay, can we move to the next one? Okay. Real power is about partnership. Real power is about partnership. So I want to see a world where um where Easter Seals Midwest and communities and the pieces of the community people with disabilities that you all support are in partnership together. And you might say, "Oh, we already have that going on." Well, double down, think deeply. All right? I hope this was inspirational, and I wonder if we have any uh, questions. Inspiration isn't always bad, right? It depends on where you get it and then what you do with it.
Chris, we do have a question in the Q&A. What would you recommend for people that want to get engaged but do not know where to begin?
Well, I think um, reaching out to um, an organization that you're already engaged with. I know that um, I know that um, most organizations in the greater St. Louis region have a way for you to plug in. I especially know that Easter Seals Midwest has that. So start with a conversation. Now, um, you guys will talk more about conversations throughout the series. So even when we're talking about genuine conversations with our legislator, the community organizer would say, take that same principle and apply it to the people we support, right? Make sure we're always having conversations where we're plugging people in to practice their gifts and their talents. Was that a good? I tried to answer that.
Thank you, Chris. I don't see any additional questions, but I encourage people to drop them in there. I will share with you, Chris, since you have not been monitoring the chat, a couple of comments that I think are compliments to what you've shared with us today. One says, I love that concept that advocates are adding to the history of the movement. Another comment, how perfectly fitting to launch the series around the why, embedded within the historical context. Whose dial we collectively move. Thank you, Chris, for this insightful contextual framing that nourishes our sense of communal belonging to the movement.
Thank you.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much.
And feel free, if anyone wants to drop a comment to Chris in the chat, we'll share those with him. If anyone has another comment, starting this series talking about the history is a great reminder as we move through the series that this movement started with the voice of one person and grew as more people heard this voice, a reminder that everyone's voices add up. Very true. Let's see. I think we might have one more question.
Can I say one more thing? A voice doesn't have to be a spoken voice either. Voices can express in many ways. You all know that, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention again.
Thank you. We have a question in the Q&A. How are you able to keep your cool when dealing with huge situations? And how do you tolerate those being not an ally?
Well, privately, I don't really keep my cool. That's why my wife is so important to my process. But publicly, I have been taught to sort of step back, right? My training taught me to step back and sort of understand that, right, everybody has um um has self-interest. Self-interest is something we always talk about. Um, and I just always understand that there will be people who don't get on board. And I don't spend a lot of time, um, I spend a little bit of time, but not a lot of time focused on them because there are lots of people who will get on board. And that can be even national figures, right?
We have another comment in the chat. I appreciate your description and perspective on being an ally and the need for allyships and partnerships. Appreciate very much for being on, Chris. As a person with disabilities, caring for those with disability, you're an amazing person with a golden heart.
Thank you thank you so much.
Okay. I'll leave 2 more seconds, going once, going twice, to answer in the chat. Participants who registered will get a recording of this webinar. Please, if you enjoyed it, share it with those who you want to engage. Have some friends over and watch it with a bowl of popcorn and sign up for future opportunities. That last one is Chris again, so we'll get his name right next time. I promise it'll say Chris Worth. Please give Chris a big round of applause, or whichever emoji you find to be your favorite. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Anything left to add, Chris?
I would just say reflect on each toolbox, in each toolbox, reflect on that historical context, right, as you're moving through it. All right?
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. We hope to see you again.